Hello and welcome to this 10-minute talk for the British Association for Local History. My topic today is going to be English Civil War sequestration, and I'm going to show you how finding one document in an archive prompted a study of an entire city. Sequestration was a policy used by Parliament during the 1640s and 1650s to confiscate the real and personal estates of Catholics and Royalists on the ground that they were responsible for the English Civil War. So what exactly happened if you were sequestered? An order for the confiscation of property would be issued by a committee, and they would send a sequestrator, at least one appraiser, a team of local craftsmen, and if necessary, a troop of soldiers to the house or estate to take away the goods. This image is called Pillar Chamber at Bolsover Castle, and it's the closest depiction of a sequestration raid that I've ever found. It was actually painted in 1846, so 200 years after the fact, but it's remarkably accurate. In the corner, we can see a soldier coming through from a different room carrying a chest of property. In the foreground, another soldier is going through a trunk to see what's inside, and there are two men seated at a table creating an inventory of the items they were taking away. Sequestration is generally viewed as a purely negative policy through which Parliament essentially stole property from anyone they considered to be on the wrong side. Those people then faced a long legal and political battle to regain their goods and estates. But a couple of months before I submitted my PhD, I realised there was a whole other side to this story. Who were the people buying the confiscated property? One of the documents which prompted these thoughts was this. It's a sale list and account book kept by a man called John Cogan, a sequestrator from Canterbury. He oversaw the sequestration of two main properties just outside the city walls. The first was St Augustine's Abbey, known to Cogan as Lady Wootton's Palace, and the second was the Moat House, owned by Lord Finch. I'm going to be talking about St Augustine's Abbey here. The Abbey is one of 3 UNESCO World Heritage Sites in Canterbury and is now in the hands of English Heritage. It was founded by St Augustine in the year 598 or thereabouts as a monastery, and by the mid-16th century it was the 14th richest monastic site in England. Henry VIII took full advantage of that, and after the dissolution of the monasteries he had the site converted into a royal palace for Anne of Cleves. Elizabeth I briefly stayed there in 1573, and Charles I and Henrietta Maria are believed to have consummated their marriage at the palace on the 13th of June 1625. The palace was leased to Lord Wootton in 1612, and after his death in 1626, his widow, Lady Margaret Wootton, retained possession of it. Sadly, the site is now in ruins. St Augustine's was raided by sequestrators on the 27th of May 1643. This presumably marks the beginning of Cogan's presence on the site. This document is the surviving inventory listing all of the property seized from Lady Wootton. The standard practice after a raid was to remove the property from the site and then sell it in the local marketplace within 10 days, but that doesn't seem to have happened here. The items sequestered from St Augustine's were left on site, and John Cogan made it his office. He would be there every day overseeing the management of the estate and selling the property whenever a buyer appeared at the door. To begin with, Lady Wootton remained living at St Augustine's, and we know that her personal chambers were not touched at all when the sequestrators created their inventory. However, she later left the site and rented another house in Kent. Returning to this image of Cogan's account book, for a long time I thought that these fragments were all that survived, and as you can see it's a bit of a mess. On one side we have a list of buyers, but the items have gone, and on the other side we have the items which had been purchased but the names of the buyers had gone. This was really irritating because I knew this would be such an exciting document if it had been intact. Fortunately, and quite by chance, I managed to find another copy. As you can see, there are still fragments missing from the top of the pages, but this is a drastic improvement over the first one. I'm sure you can imagine how excited I was when I kept turning the pages and saw the word sold over and over again. And when I found this pretty much intact version of the book, I realised that writing a very detailed case study of the impact of sequestration in Canterbury would be possible, and hence this project was born. One of the most important parts of the project for me has been working out where the people who bought Lady Wootton's property lived. Using a combination of parish registers, the 1641 poll tax and quarter sessions records, it appears that the vast majority of them lived in Canterbury, so they were overwhelmingly local. This is also consistent with how Cogan recorded the sales in his account book. Most of the buyers were known to him, and he referred to them all by name. When he didn't know someone's name, he doesn't seem to have bothered to ask. There were a few anomalous entries of sales to a Flemish woman, a poor man, or several poor people, for example, but generally speaking, he seems to have known most of the buyers. This map represents 50 of the buyers who purchased Lady Wotton's property, who I can trace with absolute certainty to a specific parish in Canterbury. St Augustine's is circled in red. And we can see from this map that the buyers were relatively evenly spread across the city. There are parishes which produce more buyers than others, but news about the sale and the availability of Lady Wotton's property had clearly spread across the city. Another important aspect has been studying what these people did for a living. The classic view of sequestration is that it only affected the wealthiest people, but my PhD research argued the exact opposite, and that it actually had a far greater impact on ordinary people than it did on the landed gentry. So as I said earlier, this project is flipping sequestration around and looking at its impact on buyers instead. Again, using a combination of parish registers, wills, quarter sessions records, and an index of freemen of the city, which is held in the cathedral archives, I'm trying to build up a clear picture of exactly who these buyers were and what their lives might have been like. We can see from this list quite how mercantile the buyers were, and what's really interesting is that you can see glimpses of these merchants buying things which would have helped them in their businesses, rather than just buying furniture for their homes. For example, cordwainers Roger Giles and Henry Martin both bought textiles which they could have used in shoemaking. Bricklayer Isaac Clark bought one great load of great stones for 5 shillings. Pewterer Thomas Harrison bought all of the pewter. John Barton, who was a cooper, bought the tubs and casks from the Abbey's brew house and actually spent about £5, which was a considerable investment. Brewer Jeremy Masterson bought 16 dozen and 6 bottles at 2 shillings a dozen. So even though sequestration was a right pain for Lady Wotton, it was potentially beneficial for these tradesmen. And this is an angle of sequestration which has never been considered before. It's always been viewed very negatively, but I think there is an alternative story here as well, and I'm just starting to tease out elements of it through this project. The final thing I want to highlight today are a few of the sequestered objects themselves, because there are some interesting stories to be told here. The first is an instance of iconoclasm. The efforts made by Richard Culmer at the cathedral in December 1643 are well documented, and we know that he destroyed a number of stained glass windows, statues, and paintings. There's no record of Culmer turning his attention to St Augustine's, but someone else did. When the inventory of Lady Wotton's goods was made on the 27th of May 1643, there were 3 men named as the appraisers. One of them was John Pollen, who later became the mayor of Canterbury for the year 1644-5. On Pollen's orders, a painting of Christ on the cross was taken from St Augustine's and burned. The painting was 3 yards high, and Cogan estimated that it had originally cost £20, but it was valued at just £1. Ultimately, Pollen decided its true value lay in its potential to be a political statement for him. What's quite intriguing about this painting is that the original inventory which Pollen himself helped to draw up did not contain a description of it. It was just grouped in with a bunch of miscellaneous paintings. Can we speculate that Pollen took note of the painting during that initial raid and filed away the knowledge of its existence until such time as it could be useful for his career? In particular, the statement in Cogan's accounts that the picture was sent for by Mr. Pollen suggests to me that it was not burned at St Augustine's, but rather elsewhere in Canterbury. I can only imagine that this was done as a deliberate political display, so the most logical place to burn it would be perhaps the marketplace just outside the cathedral gate. Another argument for this being a deliberate political statement, rather than a genuine attempt to destroy any religious memorabilia in St Augustine's, is that a later inventory made in July 1646 on the orders of the next mayor, Avery Sabin, recorded that they found one little picture of the Lord, valued at 5 shillings, in the dining room, as well as paintings of King Solomon and the high priest Aaron, which were valued at £2 10 shillings. These had all been left in the abbey previously for Lady Wotton's use. The final items I want to talk about were described in Cogan's account as cloth of gold. We have to remember that St Augustine's was turned into a royal palace and it hosted monarchs, the most recent being Charles I and Henrietta Maria in 1625. Just like the painting of Christ on the cross, the 1643 inventory did not identify anything as cloth of gold, so the only reason we know these items existed is thanks to Cogan's account book. He recorded 3 buyers purchasing these items, and apart from the livestock, they were the most expensive items sold. So purely from an economic perspective, it's interesting to see which families in Canterbury were able to afford such a luxury. The first buyer was Mrs. Annet. She had been born in Sandwich in 1599 as Elizabeth Verrill, and she married Charles Annet Jr. on the 12th of August 1619. He worked as a barber surgeon in Canterbury. This is the second of 3 purchases she made from Lady Wootton's property, and it also represents the single most expensive transaction made by a woman in Cogan's account book. In addition to a gilt bedstead and some other assorted items, she bought 5 stools and chairs of cloth of gold. The second and third purchases of cloth of gold items may have been made at the same time, because the entries are next to each other in Cogan's account. We have Mr. Ower, who was quite a regular purchaser, and in this case he bought 7 cloth of gold chairs. Immediately after him was Mr. Knight, who bought 1 footstool of cloth of gold. For things to be described as cloth of gold in this period, the fabric literally did have to contain real gold. These were genuinely luxurious items, not knockoffs. The question I want to leave you with today is whether these chairs could potentially have been made in preparation for Charles I's visit in 1625. They are significantly more expensive and luxurious than any other items in this inventory, so it's clear St Augustine's wasn't filled to the brim with things like this. They are anomalous, but when you consider them within the context of a royal visit, which was also the wedding night of the King and Queen, they make more sense. The people of Canterbury knew they were getting a bargain with the sale of Lady Wootton's furniture, but were they actually getting an even bigger bargain with the King's furniture?